You're watching Mugen TV RPG Haven. Experience a fantasy like no other.
Hey guys, MugenLord here, and I'm back again with another Final Fantasy VII Remake video. And before we begin, if you haven't checked out my last video where we talked about the progression in Final Fantasy VII Remake going into Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, how the developers handle important transferring of data such as levels, maybe equipment and materia, I definitely like to hear your thoughts because in this topic we'll be pretty much following up on that. So let us dive right into it. Even before we begin that, I just want you to know that there's potential spoilers of the original Final Fantasy and also spoilers to Final Fantasy VII Remake. So let's dive right into it. So this topic is going to be like a two-folded topic. The first part of this topic I want to talk about is how will they address exploration moving into Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? Because if you guys don't know and you haven't played the original, after you leave Midgard, the game pretty much opens up into an open world, such as a world map where you're able to traverse massive lands and you can go into different places. So how would they address that in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 now that we left Midgard? So I definitely want to talk about that because there's a whole lot. I guess you could say three different ways they can tackle this, and we'll go through each part. And then the second part of this question is, where would the story stop and where would it end in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? I think that's another important piece that we definitely need to discuss. So let's address the first part of this topic. How do they address the exploration? There's three different ways they can handle this. I guess we can start from, from least, the ones that I wouldn't want them to do, all the way up into the final choice of what I would prefer them to do. So I guess we could start off with interconnected zones. Now, if you guys don't know what that is, it's essentially like, I guess you would say like the Tales series. I'll give you an example, Tales of Arise, where there is no world map, but there's zones that connect each area or each location or mass of land that you have to travel through, fight, enemies, maybe go through a quick dungeon to get to the other massive pieces of land or areas in the game. Now, the reason why I don't like this too much is because the world doesn't feel as massive and everything seemed too close together. I'll give you a perfect example. In Tales of Arise, all it takes is two zones. You go through I guess you could say a forest, and then you go into a dungeon, and then once you leave that place, you're right into a snowy Iceland. So you leave a desert and go through a cave, and now you're at a snowy Iceland. Everything just seemed like, it doesn't seem natural. The world doesn't seem massive. It doesn't seem as open as you would expect. And each location and each zone don't feel, as livable or breathable. Everything seems and feels like a dungeon, and it creates a lot of linear aspects, and I hope they don't go that route. I really hate that approach, and there's been a lot of modern JRPGs that does that, just having connected zones just to get to other places. I do not like that at all. And then the other option they could go is open world. Now, it seems like most modern games nowadays love the open world, and to me, I just don't think it fits too well with the Final Fantasy series, mainly like Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15 was an open world, and I just didn't like it too much. And I think the drawbacks to open worlds is, one, it takes a crap ton of resources, a crap ton of time in order to be able to produce something like this. And plus, the open world has to make sense. Everything has to line up well. The terrain has to make sense. And the thing about an open world is if you have an open world, especially in Final Fantasy 15, most of the open world, there was not much you can do in it. And in Final Fantasy VII Remake, if they do go to open world approach, how would they address that? And it wouldn't be interesting to have this open world if there's really nothing to do in that space. I think that's the downfall to a lot of open worlds nowadays, where they create these massive, beautiful lands, set pieces, and it's just barren. There's nothing in them. There's nothing interesting that catches your eyes for you to explore, and you're not really rewarded for your exploration. There's nothing to do in them. So to me, the open world situation with Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, I wouldn't like that. Now, the final part, what I would suggest is they go the traditional world map route. Now, a lot of you may not agree with me, and some of you may agree with me, but I think if they just do the traditional world map, developers can spend a lot more resources in each location that you visit within the world map. So say for example, you know, after you leave Midgard, you go to the world map, and let's just say that you go to Mithril Mines. You can spend more time developing Mithril Mines and making it expansive, because a lot more resources can be put into that location to just, you know, make it more open-ended, where there's more routes you can go. You can actually add in more story set pieces, maybe add in hidden enemies, hidden bosses to get special materia, and have more open spaces to create interesting set pieces for combat as well. I think that'd be a perfect aspect. And the thing is, like, I think the perfect modern JRPG that pulled off a successful world map was Ni no Kuni 2. Ni no Kuni 2, I really loved it. I was really surprised when I played Ni no Kuni 2, is the fact is that once I got to the world map, I was like, wow, this feels weird. There's a world map in this game? And I'm able to traverse the world map. They did it right. It was a modern RPG that actually had a world map, and you're able to travel to these specific locations, and the locations were well expanded. And plus, when you're able to do that, you're able to create diverse locations that way when you have a world map, opposed of having an open world where the locations aren't as diverse, because everything has to stay as consistent as possible. But when you go into a location from a world map, the developers can just go crazy with the development of each location that they go to. They can spend a whole lot more time with the details and expanding it. And I really would love for them to just go to the world map. I don't know why Final Fantasy had just ditched the world map system altogether. There's nothing wrong with the world map. I really enjoyed the world map. So that's pretty much my opinion on the exploration aspects. And from what we got with the news with Final Fantasy Remake Part 2, that is something that they really are trying to focus on and to address moving forward. So I'm looking forward to see what they do with that. Alright, so the next part of the topic, which we really need to talk about, is how will they address, or where will the story end in Final Fantasy Remake Part 2. Now, the developer said that when it comes to development of Final Fantasy Remake Part 2, they did say that since they already have most of the resources made from Final Fantasy Remake 7 Remake Part 1, that development will be a little bit faster, a little bit easier, since they have the resources that they have. Now they just got to add on to what's already there. Now the thing is, they said if gamers and fans want to see a consistent release of Final Fantasy 7 Remake, each part to come out faster, then they would have to make the games or the story aspects of where the story ends much shorter. But if they want to have a much bigger experience as far as story is concerned and gameplay is concerned, then it will take a lot longer for them to release these games. Now, I prefer the second option. I don't mind them taking as long as they can. I mean, come on, we have Final Fantasy 16 coming and on the way. And of course, Final Fantasy 14 is an awesome game as well. So there's also a ton of different RPGs that you can possibly play as we wait for the second part of Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and just multiple parts ahead from that. So I would prefer that. Now, if you look at Final Fantasy 7 Remake, the first game, you notice that they was able to take a small section, which is the Midgard section. Now, if you played the original Final Fantasy 7, Midgard, you can get through Midgard, I believe, like an hour and a half to maybe like 2 hours, depending on how you level and everything. You can get through that part in 2 hours. The developers was able to take a 2-hour experience, which is Midgard, and he was able to stretch that. He was able to stretch that shit to damn near 30 to 40 hours, depending on how you level, the questing, and you just trying to be a completionist. They was able to take a 2-hour experience and make that to a 30 to 40 hour experience. So if they're willing to do that, there's no telling what they're able to do moving to Part 2. So that's why I asked this question: where could they possibly start or end? Now we do know where the story has last left off. If you play intermission, you know Cloud and his party was dropped off by Chocobo Bill. He dropped them off at the crossroads between Calm and Chocobo Stable and the other places moving forward. So we already know at the beginning of the game the party will be going to Calm. Now how much they will change going into Calm, don't know. We already addressed this video talking about the Calm flashback. If you haven't seen that video, advise you go check that out. It was interesting. Definitely want to hear your thoughts on that. But what's after Calm? Well, you have the Chocobo Ranch, which is definitely essential to the story because you cannot travel any farther because you have to go through the marsh. In order to go through the marsh, you have to go use the Chocobo because there's a big serpent that's in the way and that can attack you, and you're really not as strong enough to even fight it at that point in the game. It can instantly pretty much kill you. So you need the Chocobo to be able to go across the marsh in order to head to Mithril Mines. But like I said before, they're able to take a small experience and expand it into a much longer experience with filler and everything, especially with the first game. So the second game, the marsh can actually be a location to itself, opposed to it being on the world map to where you get the Chocobo and you walk across the marsh to avoid the serpent. So how would they address that? It could be a location to itself. We just have to wait and see. And they can pretty much expand that into whatever they want to expand that to. But as you exit the marsh, you enter the Mithril Mines, where you will also run into the Turks, Reno and Rude, which I would definitely love to see how they would pretty much interpret that into the Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. So Mithril Mines would essentially be another location to itself that you would travel from the world map, and you travel in there. And Mithril Mines wasn't really a long location. It had, it was linear, but it had its various paths that you can go to be able to find different items within Mithril Mines. They can definitely expand that a little more and have extra, other areas to traverse through within that. Now, there's plenty of people that were saying that maybe they can stop at Junon, because Junon is where you would go, and actually President Rufus is actually there as well. President Rufus is there, and this is where Cloud and the others would sneak, and Cloud would actually wear a Shinra uniform and something that he never wore in a long time, and you guys had to pretty much sneak onto a Junon ship in order to get across to the other part of the world map. Now, a lot of people was speculating or theorizing that they could possibly stop here, because when you get onto the ship, the ship is under attack by a piece of Genova, and you do run into another hallucination of Sephiroth, and then you can fight Genova on the ship, and then they can end that off from that set piece. But I don't know. I really don't want that. I think the game will be really, really short, because like I said before, if you look at it, after Calm, you have the Chocobo Ranch, and then you have the Marsh, and then you have Mithril Mines, and then you have Junon. And I think that would be a pretty short experience, which means if they was to stretch it to Junon, they would have to put a whole lot of filler in between these locations. And not just that, Junon is the only town after Calm, if you think about it, because other than that, you only have the Marsh and Mithril Mines in between that. But there's a lot of set pieces you can do within Junon as well that they pretty much would like to pretty much fill in as well, because you're still a mercenary. You'll probably have a ton of mercenary missions within Junon. But as you leave Junon, and in my opinion, I really think they should go past that, because there's a whole lot more things they can essentially do. In my opinion, I think they could stop. I would love them to stop at the Nibelheim Shinra Mansion. I would love for them to stop there, especially if they go the world map route, because if you go the world map route, you can actually knock out a lot of locations, because you don't have an open world that you have to deal with, and you don't have the interconnected world that you have to deal with. I would think, in my opinion, that the best place to stop would be the Nibelheim and Shinra Mansion. The reason why I say this is because after we have the Calm flashback, as we talked about before, Cloud talks about the destruction and the massacre at Nibelheim, and that mostly everybody died at Nibelheim. Nibelheim is pretty much essentially a barren wasteland. Like, it doesn't exist no more. So it would be interesting for Cloud and his party to go to Nibelheim only to find Nibelheim rebuilt once again, which would contradict what Cloud had said during the flashback, and it will also scare the hell out of Tifa, because remember, both Cloud and Tifa are both from Nibelheim, but they both have a different perspective of Nibelheim, and also Tifa remembered that very day of what happened to Nibelheim and what happened with Sephiroth, and it will also bring in, for the Zack fanboys, since they're pretty much, you know, screwing us with this whole keeping Zack alive, they can definitely weave into some Zack memories, or they can weave in this alternate timeline of Zack as well if they go this route, which I think would be pretty interesting. And not just that, I forgot to mention that on our way to Nibelheim, you do go to Ganga Village. Ganga Village is where Zack lives, so you will be getting some Zack story or some set pieces with that, which we'll talk about in a separate video. But I think Nibelheim will be a perfect place. We go into the mansion, we get some more story set pieces, and we'll most likely run into a boss and beat one of the major bosses there, and we can pretty much essentially pick up the third part after the mansion and actually grab Vincent while we're there. So there's a lot of things could possibly go with this, but I think Nibelheim would be the perfect spot for them to end the second game. So they should, now how would they deal with a boss? I think they would have to set up a nice boss fight to make it feel like a complete game, where it, you know, it's like, hey, this is a definitive experience, and they would have to give us an ending that's satisfiable. And of course, since they want to subvert our expectations, they can pretty much throw in another curveball dealing with Zack, or they can introduce us to Vincent at the end of part 2 at the Nibelheim and the Shimmer Mansion aspects, and then you can see both I guess you say Vincent joining the team, and they're traveling towards Rocket Town. So I think they can pretty much end it off there. I think it makes much more sense to end it off there, because I can't see any other reason to not do that. But I think that would be a perfect spot to stop, especially if you have the world map part aspects of the game where you're able to pretty much, like I said, expound on the lands a bit more and everything. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts, because pretty much going to wrap this video up. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on how you think the developers could approach exploration in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 and beyond, and where the developers could potentially stop the story for Final Fantasy Remake Part 2. Definitely want to hear your thoughts. But then again, that means they would have to meet Sid, so I don't think they want to introduce too many other characters in this second part. They would probably have to hold that off. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts. So if you like this video, definitely hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to hear more news related to Final Fantasy VII Remake, definitely hit the bell to be notified. This is MugenLord signing off. I'll see you Game Fiends later. Peace out.